Hi there, and welcome to a new episode of Salty Critics Corner. I'm Christina, and today we'll be talking about horror novels. You don't really need me to tell you what day it is. Happy Halloween! And even if you don't celebrate Halloween, or you consider it to be more of a, American celebration where everything is about shopping, 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 and getting a costume and spending a lot of money, there's no denying that a lot of different cultures have a day dedicated to celebrating the dead, honoring them, and maybe appeasing them by giving gifts to those in need. So, for example, where the Salty Critics are from, which is Romania, we don't celebrate Halloween, but we actually celebrate something called Mosh, which basically means ancestors or elderly people in your family. And we do this in the summer. There's a Saturday in the summer where we buy different dishes, we fill them with food, and we take them to other family members or friends or those in need, and we say the name of those dearly departed as we give them away. So it's basically an act of charity for those who have, passed on to the next life. But to bring it on to books and horror in general, that goes way back to ancient times, really, where people needed to explain the things that they didn't really understand. They needed to give names to phenomena they didn't yet have an explanation for. And then, obviously, humanity's always had that creative streak. So we ended up with, the familiar like vampires or werewolves, but also the lesser known like the echidna, the lamia, or the kamazots. To bring it back to books, though, horror fiction spans the spectrum from the slightly psychological to the actual gore fests. And every single novel is valid, obviously, but I think what a lot of readers suffer when they want to read horror novels is the fact that the quality isn't really always there. So, what do you do if you want to read a spooky novel but you actually want good writing and character development and all that good stuff? Well, we've got 5 recommendations for the discerning horror fan. And please be aware, these are not your traditional books that you usually see everywhere. At least we don't hope so. We hope to give something a bit different. And maybe some people wouldn't even describe these as horror genre, at least not all of them. But just to bring something a little bit new to this spooky celebration. And obviously, these aren't just books for Halloween, they're books for the cold, dreary months that we have ahead of us. So, yeah, without further ado, let's get started. Number 1, Henry James, The Turn of the Screw. A classic. Plot, very simple. Mrs. Gross is a governess who is hired by a rich but absent uncle to take care of his children, Miles and Flora. She moves to Bly Manor, which is the stately, beautiful, castle-like abode of this very rich man, and she believes at first that Miles and Flora are the dream job. They're beautiful children, they're very well educated, they're obedient, so what more could she wish for? But obviously, there's something going on, and the more Mrs. Gross finds out about the history of Bly Manor and its former inhabitants, the more she realizes that there are perhaps more people living there than she thought at first. So, why should you read this? One might think that a traditional horror novel wouldn't really stand the test of time, and then why would we call it a classic though? But to stay focused. Nowadays, we're so inured to gore and very disturbing films, for example. We might think a classic like The Turn of the Screw would just be, boring. And since it's also written by Henry James, and I think a lot of people still have a bit of trauma over, having to write essays about Henry James in high school or university. And yeah, that's probably the scariest thing people expect from him. But actually, The Turn of the Screw, and I've read it recently, perhaps I was reading it at just the right time, it was really cold outside, it was raining, it was very moody, but it immersed me into the atmosphere of Bly Manor. Henry James does, again, a beautiful job, same as I mentioned in Washington Squares in a different video. I'm going to put it up here. But he does such a great job of describing environments without being overly descriptive and just boring you to death with, where the nightstand goes and where the chandelier goes and yada, yada, yada. And on top of this beautiful decor of Bly Manor, you have Mrs. Gross, who is probably one of my favorite characters in horror so far. She's the governess, but she's very young and she's very intelligent, and she catches on so quickly to what's going on at Bly Manor that I was genuinely impressed, because when I started reading it, I thought this was going to be one of those novels where the main character goes like, oh, this cannot be true, this cannot be happening, even as the ghost is standing in front of her. And Mrs. Gross was nothing like that. She is a woman of action, and I really like that, especially from a classic novel. So it's pretty short. If you want a short, moody October read, then yeah, turn up the screw, give it a try. Don't let Henry James scare you away. Number 2, Kang, the vegetarian. And to be honest, I was really tempted to place here The Witches of Mayfair, but we just did a full episode on that. So again, I'm gonna put it in a box somewhere here. Back to the vegetarian. Despite it being only a couple hundred pages, I have a really hard time describing the plot. But just to keep it simple, and this is just the beginning of the novel, it starts out with what I think is a classic horror story trope. You've got a husband and a wife, and they've been married a long time, but neither of them really knows each other. And they both repress a lot of feelings, and obviously that's where the best horror comes from. But when the wife has a dream about animal slaughter, she suddenly decides to become a vegetarian, and the first part of the novel deals with her husband's reaction to her basically taking a decision without consulting him. And then the novel really evolves past the relationship. You get different perspective, different narrators, and you explore more of the wife, Yongkie. I don't know if I said that right, but her descent into madness, basically. And why should you read The Vegetarian, especially as a spooky book that's not really a horror novel? Well, I think it's all in the atmosphere. And when compared to the next book that I'm gonna mention, this one doesn't even rank near it, like on the disturbing scale. It also lacks any ghosts, it lacks any creepy crawlies, and the horror itself lies more in the exploration of how humanity and violence are so interconnected that they cannot basically live one without the other. And the author has described this using a phrase that I thought was really good, and it's called the impossibility of innocence. And she used it to tell more about the process of writing it. So, The Vegetarian actually started out as a short story called The Fruit of My Woman, and that short story was about a woman turning into a plant. In The Vegetarian, obviously, this is more of a metaphor of Jung-hye turning into a plant, but the whole atmosphere, this idea that there is simply no hope to humanity living an innocent life, that basically the universe is destructive and we are its main force, this is so bleak and gray that it genuinely took me to a more apocalyptic sort of novel, more like The Road by Cormac McCarthy, for example, rather than a novel about a woman really living in modern times, having a normal life, well, up to a point, etc. I wish I had better words for it, honestly, but it's about despair, and I don't think there's anything really scarier than that, and that's why I think The Vegetarian is such a good spooky book. Yeah, there you have it. Our next scary book is actually an author, but I will recommend starting with this novel. So we've got Ryu Murakami and his novel Audition, which is probably his best known novel, thanks to the Takashi Miike classic cult horror film. The story is pretty simple. So you have Aoyama, this character, this man who is a widower, he has a son, and he basically wants to find himself a new wife. One of his friends is a advertising director, and he comes up with a brilliant idea of organizing an audition for a fake commercial so that Aoyama can find his perfect wife. This is where Asami comes into the plot, and at first she does look like the perfect wife for Aoyama. She's very young, she's very beautiful, and she seems really meek and obedient, exactly what this elderly widower was looking for. But obviously, the plot is about to unfold. So, just like Aoyama seems like this really boring man and plays at being very upstanding on the outside, but of course, he's auditioning for a wife, so actually, on the inside, he's really cunning and self serving. You have Asami, who seems so innocent on the outside, but of course, she hides some pretty intense secrets. Not gonna give them away just in case people aren't familiar with the film, obviously. But why should you read this? And especially read it as a spooky novel. This is a book and a writer really that never fails to make me feel like I need a shower after I read any of his books. And that's because he really delves into the human depravity with such an incisive, objective way of writing. But at the same time, it's very hallucinatory. And honestly, the only other writer I can really come up with that's in any way similar is probably William S. Burroughs. So not even Charles Bukowski. We're going full naked lunch, that kind of thing. But honestly, Ryu Murakami takes it to the next level. Maybe not an Audition, but definitely in Coin Locker Babies or Almost Transparent Blue, both of those novels. Whereas Audition, I feel like is more for fans of horror. So let's go back. Why should you read this? Audition is one of those novels where everything just starts out appearing normal, but you know the horror is gonna hit at some point. And with Murakami, once the horror hits, it really will hit you all at once. So yeah, Audition by Ryu Murakami. Start with this one, but definitely tread carefully if you try to read any of his other novels, even if you are a horror fan. Even then. Our next book is a bit of a wild card, but I'm just gonna put it out there. Philip K. Dick, A Scanner Darkly. You will always find this novel in the science fiction aisle or bookshelf at your favorite library, but to me, it is a very scary novel. So I wanted to put it in our spooky novels video. To give you a bit of the plot, this is like many other Philip K. Dick novels, truly meandering and complicated, but it's about these two guys, Bob and Fred. One is a substance D user, the other one is a policeman who is tasked with finding out where the supply chain for substance D is coming from. It's a substance that produces very intense hallucinations. Now, the twist, and this is not a twist because it's in the first couple pages of the novel, is that Bob and Fred are the exact same person, but obviously thanks to the substance and thanks to some really interesting contraptions, they live completely independent lives. So it's like policeman undercover but taken to the next level. Philip K. Dick actually said that he wrote it as a semi-autobiography, but felt like he had to add science fiction elements. So one of those is the fact that this story takes place in a dystopian Orange County in the 90s, which at the time of writing was the future. Keep in mind that this was a novel released in like the 70s. So Philip K. Dick wrote this as an autobiography, but he was too scared that nobody would buy a book written by him that wasn't science fiction. So he gave it a couple science fiction elements, but I wouldn't really say this is for sci-fi fans, honestly. Why I think you should read this as a horror novel is because I think when I read it, at least to me, described mental illness perfectly, and this idea that you just cannot trust what your brain is telling you, and that things that you know are illogical are happening right in front of your eyes and your brain is telling you that this is real. Honestly, much like The Vegetarian, this is scarier to me than any ghost in a castle, any werewolf or anything like that, because really, how do you escape your brain? And obviously, we have a novel about a illicit substance, and some people do try to escape it via this way. And Philip K. Dick leaves us with an excellent commentary that comes from personal experience of what it feels like to not be able to trust your own self. Now, I'm not going to spend any more time on this novel because I kind of want to do a full video on Philip K. Dick. He's one of my favorite writers, and I feel like bundling him up in the sci-fi genre does him a disservice because his novels go way beyond science fiction. So to give you an idea of why this is such a good horror film, I'm just going to read out the first couple of sentences. This is how the novel opens. Once a guy stood all day shaking bugs from his hair. The doctor told him there were no bugs in his hair. After he had taken a shower for 8 hours, standing under hot water hour after hour, suffering the pain of the bugs, he got out and dried himself, and he still had bugs in his hair. In fact, he had bugs all over him. A month later, he had bugs in his lungs. There you have it. How much scarier than that does it get? Finally, I wanted to end with the King. Stephen King, of course, and one of my favorite novels of his, Pet Sematary. I don't need to give you the plot because this book has been adapted so many times, but I will do it anyway to keep it short. Basically, the Creed family moves into this beautiful old house in Maine, and everything seems, of course, too good to be true, just like Turn Up the Screw. As a family, they basically have it all. But the nearby woods next to their house, of course, hides a very dangerous secret, which is not really a secret because it's in the title of the novel. There is a pet cemetery. But the Creeds are soon going to learn that sometimes dead is better. Oh, I just love that sentence so much. And really, that's why you should read it. I wanted to end this with Stephen King because I feel like even though his reputation has improved a lot in the past couple of years, there used to be this really strong feeling of hate towards him and people looking down on him and considering him some sort of like airport read just because he produces so many novels so quickly. I think his output is something like one novel every year or 2 years or something like that. But Stephen King and Pet Sematary have a really special spot in my heart. This was one of the first horror novels that I ever read, and it was the first Stephen King I ever read. And it just revealed to me what a master storyteller sounds like, because that's who Stephen King is. And the fact that he can still produce new novels with new plots after like putting out 60-70 books is just incredible to me. And yeah, this is the hill I'm gonna die on. To be honest, Stephen King deserves respect, and I know that most people start out with his first couple of novels, so whether that's Carrie, Cujo, Christine, Salem's Lot, the novels before his accident, some people start out with those and consider them his worst, and I'm a little bit more in that camp. Like, I feel like his newer novels are a lot better in terms of quality of writing, but some people believe that after he had his accident and got sober that his novels kind of went down, and I think that's more because he toned down some of those classic horror tropes. So he stopped writing about vampires and werewolves and killer dogs and bits like that, and I feel like that's when he started improving because he brought something quite new rather than reworking genre classics. But yeah, and that's a big discussion to have. To bring it all the way back, I refuse to refer to Stephen King as a guilty pleasure. Like I said, this man is a master storyteller. The rhythm of every sentence, for example, dead is better, his talent for building tension, twisting these plots into new ways, even now, honestly, to me, it's nothing short of astounding. And Pet Sematary is a beautiful but chilling read. It's impossible to put down, even as you realize that the characters are about to make these incredible mistakes. You see them, they know they're about to make a mistake, but they still go for it, and you really understand it, why they make the choices they make. It's in character. Yeah, that's just Stephen King to me. Once he gets a hold of you, he never lets go. So yeah, you're gonna read Pet Sematary most likely in one go. And there you have it. Which of these spooky books have you read? Are you planning to sit down with one of them this Halloween? We really hope they'll keep you cozy throughout autumn and winter. These are not just Day of Dead reads. So yeah, give them a try. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and see you next time. Stay salty.